Money means social class means money. If people think about social class in general, often the three-class system comes to their minds. The easiest way of dividing society into social classes is to simply rate their possessions, maybe also looking at professions and education. This means that people like lawyers, CEOs, or professors who are living in huge houses, driving expensive cars, and sending their children to Oxbridge are upper class, and people who work in less decisive jobs or rent their homes are lower or working class. But although financial wealth is still highly correlated to class, it is not the only factor determining social class, especially since the Great British Class Survey showed that the three-class system is outdated and instead could be replaced by another class system, which looks not only at financial wealth, but also at social interactions and cultural habits. Analysis of the GBCS came up with 7 classes, which were explained in our first video. Of course, this classification can be discussed and criticized as well, but in our language class, this classification served as a model.
The indicators of a membership to a certain class shifted from only being regarded as occupation, wealth, and education to also looking at other economic as well as social and cultural indicators, and therefore the influence of wealth has to be newly defined. Additionally, it has to be mentioned that wealth is not only influenced by the financial aspect in terms of money you can access easily, but also by private pensions, financial assets, property, and other physical assets. But how has the importance of wealth for social class membership changed, since the three-class system has been seen as an oversimplified distinction?
In our video, we would like to answer the question of whether wealth is the most important determiner of social class or not, and in what way wealth still influences the belonging to a social class and if this has changed. Furthermore, we would like to discuss whether an occupation in which people have more income leads to respectable wealth with which social mobility is possible. In this context, the IPPR Commission on Economic Justice stated in 2017 that wealth inequality is twice as high as income inequality. Moreover, in England, the gap between rich and poor is widening more than in other European countries. The question that immediately occurs is whether this is also due to the continued existence of class structures in England and the idea that there is less social mobility than desired.
Wealth is a huge factor in social class, but class is also based on social relationships. This can be underlined with regard to the new classes the GBCS has proposed, such as the emergent service workers. Therefore, it is important to look at the mechanisms which lead to class membership. In addition, the categories to measure wealth, such as region, class, ethnicity or gender, will be very briefly evaluated in this video, but will be further discussed in the following videos.
In order to evaluate how important wealth is in determining social class, we need to define the term wealth. In 2017, Karis Roberts and Matthew Lawrence analyzed the Wealth and Assets Survey by the Office for National Statistics from 2015 in their essay called Wealth in the 21st Century. According to them, wealth is measured in 4 different categories, which are private pension wealth, property wealth, financial wealth, and physical wealth. The main sources of wealth in the UK are, on the one hand, private pension wealth, which makes up 40% of the total wealth in the UK, and on the other hand, property wealth, which makes up 35%. The rest is made up of financial wealth, which is the last equally shared factor, meaning that financial wealth is not equally distributed within the population, and physical wealth. Generally, wealth in the UK is unevenly divided. This means that the wealthiest 10% of households own 45% of the nation's wealth. In comparison, the least wealthy half owns just 9% of the nation's wealth. The distribution of wealth is also highly affected by the region people live in. The wealthiest areas in the UK are London and the South East. Furthermore, Men are generally wealthier than women are because women are less likely to have access to family savings, and their income is often lower than that of men. Another factor where financial inequality shows is the ethnicity. Black people and other minority ethnic Brits are less likely to have housing wealth than white British people. All these factors will be discussed in the following videos, so if you want to know more about housing or regional differences, please keep watching.
But how is wealth and occupation related to class? The ONS study states that household wealth correlates with an individual's socioeconomic classification. For example, 41% of higher professionals, as for example accountants, doctors, lawyers and managers, have at least £500,000 worth of wealth. Compared to this, only 12% of people in routine and semi-routine occupations, as for example machine operators, reach this amount of wealth. Additionally, people with a degree are almost 6 times as likely as people with no qualifications to be in a household with wealth of £1 million. Something particularly interesting here that the GBCS analysis highlighted is the fact that new generations often have less wealth than the ones before. So does this affect their social class? Many young adults need financial help from their parents, such as paying their university fees or helping them to pay for their housing or everyday life. Clearly, this access to help depends on social class. 13% of the younger generation from the classes such as the elite or the established middle class have received help from their parents, while only 3% of young people from the classes such as traditional working class or the precariat received help. The GBCS analysis showed that class is equally made up of wealth, social and cultural capital. Cultural capital includes, for example, people's leisure time activities, musical tastes or food preferences. Social capital contains the number of social contacts as well as the range of occupations of these contacts. So if you won or were to win the lottery, you still wouldn't have the contacts to get a position as a CEO and to multiply your money through work. Conversely, this means that winning the lottery and increasing your wealth alone does not really move you up the social scale. Moving up the social scale involves not only wealth, but takes time up to 10 generations and requires a lot of effort concerning social contacts.
To find out what British people think about the importance of wealth regarding social class and which social class they would identify themselves as belonging to, we conducted a short survey. This survey consisted of 9 questions, both open questions and closed questions. The ages of the 23 participants lay between under 18 and over 60 years, while most of the participants are between 30 and 49 years old. This outcome is more representative than if we only had younger participants, because in the age of 30 to 50, it is more likely that people can categorize themselves into a certain class. Furthermore, people of that age have often already started their working lives and therefore have a regular income and, in the best case, own property and have started to save money for their retirement. The second question was about their average annual income, because we knew beforehand that many British people do not like to talk about their income. The answers were set as brackets and people could choose an income range, for example £10,000 to £18,000 per year, or if they chose not to answer, we included the possibility to tick "prefer not to answer." The most frequently given answers to that question were £35,000 to £50,000 annual income and "prefer not to answer," each selected by 26.1% of respondents. The second most ticked answer is £10,000 to £18,000. £25,000 to £35,000 was selected by 13% of respondents. So the average income of our survey participants is between £30,000 and £40,000 per year. The fact that 21.7% of the participants preferred not to answer this question shows that our assumption concerning the unwillingness to talk about money was right. The answers we received are at least somewhat representative because they are comparable to the statistics of the ONS from 2017, in which the average annual income is around £27,000 per year. The average annual income also corresponds to the answers the participants gave us when we asked them which class they would classify themselves as, but this will be discussed a bit later.
One of the most important factors in measuring wealth in the UK is property wealth. This was the reason why we asked our participants whether they own property. More than 85% answered yes. This seems to correspond to the idea that buying property is still important to every generation of Brits and a goal people would like to achieve. All of the participants who answered yes to the question of whether they own property were then asked in the next question to tick which of the following sorts of property they own. They could choose between detached house, semi-detached house, terraced house, flat, apartment, bungalow, second home, land, and other buildings. It was possible to tick more than one answer so that if they belonged to one of the upper classes, they also had the chance to show that they own, for example, a house and an apartment, or maybe a house and a second home in the countryside. Most of our participants, 65%, own a detached or semi-detached house. Only around 10% own a terraced house. The answer flats was also selected relatively often. At least 25% of the participants own flats. Only 5% own a bungalow and 10% own some kind of land. Most of our participants said they see themselves as middle class, which was to be expected, as because owning detached and semi-detached houses is common for average earners. Although the average annual income of our participants was slightly higher than the average income of all British households, the majority of our participants are either from the areas in or near London, for example West London or Bromley, or from the south of England, for example Southampton or Devon, which, as we will see in one of our next videos, are wealthier than other areas in the north or in the middle of Britain. This helps to explain why they almost all see themselves as middle class.
During the analysis of our survey, we discovered that all of the participants still used the three-class system when they were asked which social class they would identify themselves as. None of the participants used the new seven-class model, which was proposed after the Great British Class Survey. One reason for this might be that it is quite hard to replace the very old and commonly used three-class system in their minds with something more up-to-date. In our survey, most of the participants identified themselves as middle class, while only a few classified themselves as working, lower middle, or upper middle class. This was foreseeable, based on their answers to the preceding questions, such as the average income or property question. In the next question, we asked whether wealth alone is important in determining an individual's social class. While 78.3% answered no, 21.7% answered the question with yes. This shows that people are aware of the fact that social class cannot only be determined by the factor wealth, but that there are many more other aspects which influence social class in England. Evaluating this outcome shows again that the three-class system is outdated and that the new class system, which takes many more factors into account, is more representative. Generally, people in England know that social class is more than just money.
When we ask what wealth means for the participants personally, most of them answered money. A few others answered property, which shows that still in the minds of the people, wealth means having a lot of money and is mostly associated with this concrete financial aspect in terms of having money in the bank. Only a few of the people realized that any property you own also plays a significant role in making up wealth as a complete concept. Nevertheless, some people also gave different answers, such as stability, freedom, experience, or wisdom. As suspected, most of the people think of available money as the most important determiner of wealth.
But do they also think that wealth is the most important determiner of social class? To answer this question, we ask what they think are the most and the least important aspects in determining social class. We gave several suggestions which the participants had to rank from 1 to 5. As already mentioned, most of the people answered that they do not think that wealth alone is important to determine social class. This can also be seen in the responses to our last question, because most of the people said that in their opinion, family background is the most important factor in determining social class. The second most frequently ticked answer was education, while wealth and profession were only named in third position. Thus, we conclude that people do think that wealth in terms of money is important for social class, but that other factors such as family background or education are much more important. The following videos will provide you with more information about these topics.
In conclusion, we can state that wealth and social class are still highly correlated. But wealth is not the only factor placing someone in a certain social class. Both our literature review and our survey participants agreed on this. The fact that most of the participants told us that family background is the most important factor in social class shows us that social behavior, stability, and cultural aspects are decisive, especially when it comes to social mobility. In contrast, wealth is something which is more or less inherited, especially when we consider owning property and land. Often, the members of the elite class are what we call old money. Old money means people whose families have been rich for a long time. Social mobility is relatively difficult when it comes to the elite and social status based on inherited wealth. It takes up to 10 generations to come from the bottom to the top or vice versa. Nevertheless, to a certain extent, it is possible to move up the social scale when we take social and cultural aspects into account as the GBCS did. For example, the social class of the new affluent workers has a moderate income but a small amount of savings. Savage et al. Conclude that this class is therefore economically secure without being very well off. But the high number of their social contacts and the high score in emerging social capital ranks them higher in the 7-class system, so maybe between the technical middle class and the traditional working class, as if they would have been classified in the old 3-class system. That would be probably in the working class. So, does money mean social class, and does social class mean money? Yes, money means social class, and social class means money, but money is not the ultimate factor classifying people into social classes. If you want to learn more about social class and their relationship to people's housing, to their leisure time activities, or to their language features, please keep watching!